Um, this is deep, and I'm gonna take you right to it.
The Ku Klux Klan is the oldest terrorist group in the United States.
For 5,000 years, the white man has been the supreme race. We as I Super People's Klan intend to keep it.
This secret society of white supremacists preaches hatred of black people, and its long history goes back decades. It has reemerged again and again. Its crimes have caused bloodshed in America for more than 150 years. 150 years of hatred, racism, and horror.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. I don't believe in segregation, I believe in slavery.
150 years of exclusion, violence, and rage. This tale of cruelty still haunts the United States.
So your copyright for this.
In June 1865, the American Civil War finally came to an end. After 4 years of deadly combat, claiming more than 700,000 lives, the abolitionist North finally defeated the pro-slavery Southern states. General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, and a few months later, the 13th Constitutional Amendment ended slavery. Nearly 4 million of the South's 9 million inhabitants had been enslaved, and at last they were free of their chains. For plantation owners, this revolution was unbearable.
Slave owners were, of course, terrified by the end of slavery. They were terrified economically that they would lose their very cheap labor force, but they were also terrified that African American people would start to demand the rights of citizenship.
In 1865, a handful of Confederate veterans of Scottish descent decided to create a secret society in the town of Pulaski, Tennessee.
It was originally designed to be a fraternal order. It was designed as a joke. It was literally designed for a bunch of guys to have a reason to hang out, drink beer, and just like take care of each other.
They were young men, they were bored, they lived in a small town called Pulaski, Tennessee, and they decided to form a little secret society.
The veterans initially wanted to share stories about battles and the good old days for the slave-owning South. They gave their group a mysterious name, Ku Klux Klan.
We don't know why they chose the name Ku Klux Klan. People say it's because that's the sound a shotgun would make when it was cocked, Ku Klux, like that. The one that is most broadly accepted is meant to be named after the Greek word for circle, kuklos. And that makes a certain amount of sense when you realize that the people who founded the Klan were educated in Latin and Greek. and did use Latin phrases in particular in some of their other writings. They were very invested in the fact that they were well educated.
They added the word clan, a common term in Scotland, to the Greek phrase kuklos, and started each word with a K. The clan was born. Their first public appearances in Pulaski were peaceful, but soon harassment and intimidation of former slaves became commonplace.
The very first Klan group in Pulaski was essentially a group that kind of played pranks. They would dress up in very elaborate costumes, not the white sheets that we see today, and they would go around and try and scare people or play pranks. They often would try and frighten freed slaves who they thought were so superstitious that they would believe they were ghosts and so on.
Rumors spread that the masked men were ghosts of Confederate soldiers killed in combat and back for revenge. Fear spread among former slaves. Soon, brotherhoods began to emerge across the South, with names like the Knights of the White Camellia, the White League, and the Red Shirts. They all used the same intimidation tactics. Klansmen would stake out territory in front of polling stations to keep black men from voting. The South had to stay in white hands.
They became a kind of paramilitary organization, or more properly said, a bunch of little paramilitary organizations, which very quickly in the course of a year or so became the violent enforcers of what black people could do and could not do.
African Americans resisted, sometimes even bearing arms, but the murders and lynchings continued.
It's very important to understand that in lynching an individual, their goal was to intimidate the whole mass. That is what terrorism is. And to a very large extent they've succeeded, because while slavery was abolished, the complete subordination of African Americans continued. Unable to vote, unable to get decent jobs, unable to have education, unable to have health care. It was a very successful campaign by a small terrorist organization.
The Klan and its so-called men of justice began to get a reputation. Groups sprung up across the South, and recruitment exploded. The Klan still needed a charismatic individual to lead the fight. For the role, they chose a hero to Southerners from the War of Secession, General Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was a romantic figure. He was a celebrity. He was just kind of known as kind of like a man who's going to do what needs to be done, right? So he was sort of, he had that reputation, and he was happy to have his face put on it. He clearly indicated that he was the head of the Klan.
For a group as violent as the Klan, Forrest was an ideal leader, with a brutal reputation. A former slave trader, he had committed a number of war crimes. With Forrest at their helm, the Klansmen stepped up their attacks. The violence reached its peak in 1868. With the presidential elections approaching, dozens of courthouses, churches, and polling places went up in flames. More than 1,000 murders were committed in 4 weeks. Former slaves could by no means be allowed to exercise their rights. Doing so would have upset the system of white dominance, and they chose their victims systematically.
The main thing that the first Klan was trying to accomplish was the deactivation, the politicide of African Americans within the South. So, they particularly targeted African Americans who voted.
They even more so targeted African Americans who held office. And in many cases, they didn't go to the African Americans who held office in order to say, you need to resign your office or we're going to be back. They went in and they killed them outright, because they understood that these were people that were already established as leaders. They understood that these were people that others in the community looked to as individuals who could kind of exemplify what it meant to assert oneself as a citizen within the society. And those people needed to be neutralized.
The Reconstruction era Klan was also happy to target white Republicans, those that they saw as acting in the political interests that would further African American power.
In Washington, policymakers planned to take down the invisible empire, whatever it took. Congress adopted a series of laws to oppose the Klan, and martial law was declared. The Federal Army, still deployed in the South, was mobilized to fight the Klan and ordered to protect black voters. Slowly, the clampdown began to yield results. In 1872, the Klan officially disbanded. But it was too late. White supremacists didn't need them anymore.
When free black slaves and their sympathizers were pushed away, when black people became more and more afraid to vote because it could cost them their lives, the work of the Klan was essentially done.
In 1877, the Federal Army pulled out of the South with mixed results. The end of slavery was meant to give way to an era of equality. Instead, it was slowly replaced with segregation, which lasted for nearly a century. Blacks and whites wouldn't mix in daily life. Schools, shops, public transportation, hospitals, and more were all affected. African Americans would be separated from the white population, which fully retained power. Black people remained second-class citizens. The values of the Klan's invisible empire had spread among the general population. Lynchings of African Americans were common. The federal government turned a blind eye.
Photos from lynchings would be sold and used as postcards. There would be souvenirs from these sorts of events. People would want to take pictures in front of someone who was victimized in a lynching. So these are acts that involved, directly or indirectly, tacitly, broad swaths of the white population.
At the beginning of the 20th century, a new world was taking shape. Vertical cities emerged, and America became a country of immigration. Millions of Europeans, Catholics from the South, Jews from the East, set off to the world's leading industrial powerhouse and the promise of a better future. The Klan had fallen into obscurity, and then, 50 years after the Civil War, it was born again from its ashes. In February 1915, The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith was released. The film was an adaptation of a successful play called The Klansman. A long feature film, it looked back at the Civil War and Reconstruction. D.W. Griffith was an innovator, integrating elaborate battle scenes, realistic decor, and swelling music. The Birth of a Nation was a major cinematic experience that broke with the more amateurish, low-budget films typical of early cinematography. In the second half of the film, Griffith depicted scenes from the post-war era. Klansmen were shown not as criminals, but as justice doers.
Scholars of film look at it as very innovative and progressive in terms of its...
I'm gonna stop it right there. But I'm gonna show you what the mind says today. Watch what this man says at this meeting.
But they're really poured it on thick with the hatred and the fear. Again, it's the two-pronged approach to Republican politics.
Yeah, well, Ron DeSantis is making an effort to appeal to this people like the county commissioner and the sheriff in Oklahoma, in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, that were caught on tape saying horrifying things, including like killing journalists and like hearkening back to wasn't it a great time when they could lynch black people.
Yeah.
I mean, this was
pretty mainstream Republicanism, though.
well, that's what I'm saying. Ron DeSantis is trying to appeal to these people because the people who are we're gonna play the recording. We're gonna play some of this. The people that are caught on this recording, the county commissioner and the sheriff in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, they are people who are upset about woke. And if you were to ask them what does woke mean, they probably wouldn't be able to explain it. You know, or there would be,
none of them can.
Yeah, if you asked 100 different conservatives what woke means, you would get 100 different definitions.
Or a blank stare.
And it would all be like racist.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
And this is an example of who Ron DeSantis is appealing to.
Again tonight with new developments in the call for a host of resignations of McCurtain County officials. Today, one of the 4 officials under fire for comments allegedly made while they were being secretly recorded has resigned. District 2 Commissioner Mark Jennings did so this morning. A reporter for the McCurtain County Gazette admits to secretly recording Jennings, Sheriff Kevin Clardy, investigator Alicia Manning, and trust administrator Larry Hendricks. In a transcription by the Gazette newspaper, the 4 are accused of making racist comments and making jokes about the recent death of a woman in a house fire. Sheriff Clardy was suspended from the Oklahoma Sheriff's Association yesterday. Now we've downloaded and listened to more of the recordings published by the McCurtain County Gazette. Here's KSLA News 12's Jasmine Franklin.
I told you, Will. I know where 2 big deep holes are here illegal. Yeah, that's better. These are freed up.
We're hearing more audio from the recording released by the McCurtain Gazette, where county officials are accused of saying some very disturbing comments. The Gazette says in that audio, they were referring to the burial of 2 of its reporters, father and son, Bruce and Chris Willingham. The Gazette says in the following audio, county officials are discussing hiring a hitman to allegedly kill the reporters.
I know 2 or 3 young men, very quiet guys. And we cut no mercy. In Louisiana, because it was all mafia rats.
Yeah, but here's the reality. If a hair on his wife's head, Chris Willingham's head, or any of those people that really weren't behind all that, if the hair on their head got touched by anybody, who would be the bad guy?
The audio was recorded by Bruce Willingham, a reporter for the Gazette, after the county commissioners meeting on March 6. In the audio, the Gazette claims Jennings and Clardy can be heard making jokes about lynchings.
I'm gonna tell you something. If we find the days when Alan Marshall took a damn black cat, whooped her, throw him in the cell, I'd run. Well, it's not like that. I know. Take a damn mud creek and hang him up with the damn rope. Yeah. But you can't do anything about it. They got more rights than we got.
Also on the recording, they can be heard laughing about house fire victim Danette Stowe, referring to her remains as barbecue.
Ever had barbecue? That's no.
Yeah.
Same. Glasses on. They got a red light full of her body bag. You know what we're gonna do now, right? She goes, no, what? She goes, you gotta preheat the oven 350 degrees, leave it in there for 15 minutes. And she went, it was, and then the medical examiner actually said, hey, we're fixing to eat. And looked at me, she goes, you gonna go with me and go eat barbecue?
The Gazette The release of the audio is a part of a series the publication is creating, and the full audio recording will be released at the end of the series. In McCurtain County, Jasmine Franklin, KSLA.
You see how the attitude of some people is? It never changes, man. And people say that's just the past, but some people think that that's just a joke around. But I wanted to play that short video, what they said. But I'm going to show you a story about the Klan.
That feeling when you discover an ethically whitening charcoal toothpaste? She means holy spit. Hello.
Have you seen people in white robes with pointed hoods at the top with 2 holes for eyes? Perhaps you might have seen them in movies, doing some disturbing things to humans and even giving a satanic feeling. You will find it chilling to know that these people have existed in reality since 1920. Ku Klux Klan is a notorious white supremacist group that would hang, flog, murder, and torture minorities, especially Africans and Jews. Not only that, but the Ku Klux Klan was spreading horror when millions of Americans joined it, getting encouraged to do despicable crimes like cutting their victims' body parts, putting tar, burning their skin, and adding feathers to humiliate them. But how did a black man infiltrate such an extremist group limited only to white supremacists? Welcome to a new episode of Black Culture Diary, a channel where we talk about less known and hidden black history, culture, arts, and lost civilization. We scrutinize history here to bring the black culture back on the surface again. In this episode, we will tell you the unsettling story of the Ku Klux Klan, how a black man infiltrated it, and what happened to him. Let's get started. For the very first time, the Ku Klux Klan was founded on December 24th, 1865, in Pulaski, Tennessee, United States. The objective behind the creation was to strengthen white supremacy and suppress blacks, Jews, and minorities either by intimidation or killing. However, the Ku Klux Klan has seen declines and revivals since then. Until the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was illegal. However, the immigration in 1910 and 1920s made American white supremacists insecure again. They decided to revive the Klan, and millions of Americans joined it, making it nearly impossible for immigrants and minorities to live in the U.S. But later, the Klan was again forgotten. The American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s replenished the Ku Klux Klan once again in the 1960s. It was becoming impossible for authorities to trace its members and punish them for stopping their disturbing and unsettling crimes, like hanging, torturing, flogging, and even burning the cross. Now imagine it's 1978, and the Ku Klux Klan is rising its head once again and finding new recruits. It's late October 1978 in Colorado Springs. Ken Odell, a member of the Ku Klux Klan, receives a letter from Ron Stallworth, who wants to join the Klan and work for the so-called noble cause of the white race. Ken and Ron start talking on the phone, and Ken sees Ron as a man worthy enough to be recruited into the Klan. Ken is so impressed by Ron that he helps him gain full access to the Klan and even promotes him as a future leader of the local chapter. However, you might wonder how a black could join the Klan working against blacks. Well, to know the answer, let's go back to the story. Ken doesn't know 2 things about Ron until 28 years later when Ron reveals them in a newspaper interview. First, Ken doesn't know that Ron is an undercover police officer, and second, he is black. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on black culture, history, civilization, and natural superiority. Let's continue now. The story of how a black police officer infiltrates the KKK is initially hard to wrap your mind around, making you question if it can possibly be true. However, once you take into account the state of late 1970s technology, it becomes easier to understand how such an audacious and thrilling police sting could ever come into being. With no internet or smartphones, resurgent underground terrorist organizations rely on letter writing and telephone calls for their secret communications. Ken has no way of knowing, for example, that the voice on the other end of the telephone line, raging against slaves, belongs to anyone but what Ken likes to call an intelligent white man, like himself. Simply, Ken falls for it.
The police were concerned and wanted more information on Klan activities, and Ron had to do the hard work by infiltrating the Klan. But he had to do the job prudently and carefully. When he saw the ad in the newspaper, he wrote back expecting pamphlets in response. Instead, Ken Odell contacted him, introducing himself as the leader of the cause. During Ron's communication with Ken on the phone, he would listen to his voice carefully and try to pay attention to the details. Actually, he and the police department wanted to know what the Ku Klux Klan was thinking those days and what their psychology was. The Ku Klux Klan had always revived whenever the white supremacists felt insecurity, but the police didn't know what the insecurity was this time. However, Ken told Ron what the problem was. Once, Ken told Ron that his sister had a relationship with a black person, and it made him sick to think about him touching her. Ron now comes to know how he should pretend to get more information. Hence, he makes his two versions. One, the Black Ron, who would manage the untraceable phone line and do right correspondence. And one, the white version of himself, Chuck, a friend who worked in narcotics to deal with any clandestine meetings that may arise. On the phone, Ron will become the white supremacist, while whenever he is expected to meet in person, Ron will send his friend, Chuck. At first, Ron was expected to meet Ken and discuss his membership in the Klan. Hence, Chuck was sent, and it played very well. After some time, Ron was given the membership and a card he holds today. Although the character Chuck was working, senior staff were against it, fearing Ron's black voice would give him away. Since two different persons had talked to Ken, he might observe the difference in their voices, which he did. However, Ron said that he had a sinus infection, which Ken bought. During this investigation, Ron often had difficulty not laughing out loud at how credulous or petty the Klan members were. Later on, it is planned that 4 17-feet crosses will be burned. Klan members will collaborate on terrorist activities with other radical groups led by David Duke, the white supremacist politician and Holocaust denier. Ron formed a cordial relationship with Duke over the phone, calling him a very pleasant conversationalist. Duke then led Chuck's solemn candlelit naturalization ceremony. Ron later joked about how he had tricked the Grand Wizard, David Duke, and his followers, something he never imagined would come to define him. In a twist of fate, Ron Stallworth was assigned to protect Duke after he started receiving death threats. Ron went to Duke in his police uniform as his bodyguard and told Duke that even though he didn't agree with Duke's beliefs, he would maintain his commitment to ensuring his safety. When Ron asked for a photo with Duke, Chuck, yes, the real Chuck, stepped in and took the Polaroid. Duke wasn't pleased with this and tried to stop Ron from leaving with the photo. To stop him, Ron threatened to arrest Duke for assaulting an officer. A few days passed, and in their next phone call, Duke told Ron a story about an officer who had threatened to put him behind bars, full of racial slurs. But how successful was Ron during all this covert operation? Well, the investigation did not result in any legal action. Still, it did stop a neo-Nazi plan to bomb a gay bar, identified 7 Klansman Army personnel, and unearthed intelligence about violent plots among black extremists. It was eventually shut down for fear of misinterpretation due to Denver's 1920s police chief being a Klansman. After his retirement in 2006, Ron went public with the news and became a target for white supremacists on websites. He subsequently started carrying a gun again, saying he had no qualms about white people as his mother taught him to defend himself if called slurs. What do you think? Is the Ku Klux Klan still active today? Isn't it a possibility that thousands of Ku Klux Klan members would be working for their abhorrent objectives still today? Let us know in the comments section right below. What if the Ku Klux Klan is secretly kidnapping, torturing, and murdering black Africans? People go missing and who knows, the KKK kidnaps them. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody is talking about: the black culture, civilization, history, and the evidence proving black superiority. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
What do you think about that? Yes, but there's more historical thing. This is one video I want to show you guys that it's deep, and how even though that the Klan put a lot of people at fear, but the Klan was at fear because it was a particular group of people that they feared, and it were black people that fought back. In fact, some of them got killed. Some of the Klan members got killed. and just as well as there was some black people that got killed. But yeah, it was really it's really something. I like his channel. He gets right in line with it, and but yeah, that's how it is. People don't realize how serious this thing is, and I'm just trying to turn this, have some in the background. And yeah, so hopefully I can find this video. Yeah, trying to turn some Black Massacre. Meanwhile, I'm till I find this video, I'll give you another video. Till I find it.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of the Black Massacre series, where today I will be talking about the Ocoee Massacre of 1920. The Ocoee Massacre was a mass racial violence event that saw a white mob attack numerous black residents in the northern parts of Ocoee, Florida, a town located in Orange County near Orlando. The massacre took place on November 2nd, 1920, the day of the U.S. presidential election. By most estimates, a total of 30 to 35 black people were killed in the violence. Most black-owned buildings and residences in northern Ocoee were burned to the ground. Other blacks living in southern Ocoee were later killed or driven out of town by the threat of further violence being used against them. Thus, Ocoee essentially became an all-white or sundown town. The massacre has been described as the single bloodiest day in modern American political history. The attack was intended to prevent black citizens from voting. Black people had essentially been disenfranchised in Florida since the beginning of the 20th century. In Ocoee and across the state, various black organizations have been conducting voter registration drives for a year. In November 1920, Mose Norman, a prosperous black farmer, tried to vote but was turned away twice on election day. Norman was among those working on the voter drive. A white mob surrounded the home of Julius July Perry, where Norman was thought to have taken refuge. After Perry drove away the white mob with gunshots, killing 2 men and wounding one who tried to break into his house, the mob called for reinforcements from Orlando and Orange County. The mob laid waste to the black community in northern Ocoee and eventually killed Perry. They took his body to Orlando and hanged him from a light post to intimidate other black people. Norman escaped, never to be found. Hundreds of other blacks fled the town, leaving behind their homes and possessions. Most of the people living in Ocoee don't even know that this happened there, said Pamela Schwartz, chief curator of the Orange County Regional History Center, which sponsored an exhibit on it. For almost a century, many descendants of survivors were not aware of the massacre that occurred in their hometown. Orange County, as well as the rest of Florida, have been politically dominated by Southern white Democrats, also known as Dixiecrats, since the end of Reconstruction. But in the weeks leading up to the presidential election of 1920, blacks throughout the South were registering to vote in record numbers. At the same time, the Ku Klux Klan was experiencing a revival and had established many new chapters since 1915. 3 weeks before Election Day, the KKK warned the black community that not a single Negro would be permitted to vote. Judge John Moses Chaney, a Republican running for the United States Senate from Florida, had started a voter registration campaign to register blacks to vote in Florida because they had supported the Republican Party since Reconstruction. Mose Norman and July Perry, both prosperous black landowners in Ocoee, led the local voter registration efforts in Orange County, paying the poll tax for those who could not afford it. In an effort to preserve white one-party rule, the Ku Klux Klan marched in full regalia through the streets of Jacksonville, Daytona, and Orlando to intimidate opponents. The organization threatened Judge Chaney prior to the election. Sam Salisbury was a police chief in Orlando, Florida. A native of New York, Salisbury served in the U.S. military and was known as Colonel Sam Salisbury. A white supremacist and a member of the Ku Klux Klan, Salisbury bragged about his involvement in the violent oppression and intimidation of blacks attempting to vote in the previous 1920 election. He was one of the leaders of the events leading up to the Ocoee Massacre. He was injured in an attack he led on July Perry's home in Ocoee. Blacks were met with resistance from the white community when they attempted to vote on election day. Poll workers challenged whether black voters were really registered. The voters had to prove they were registered by appearing before the notary public, R.C. Bigelow, who was regularly sent on fishing trips so that heat was impossible to find. However, blacks, including Mose Norman, persisted but were pushed and shoved away from the polls. Norman contacted Judge John Chaney, who told him that interference with voting was illegal and told him to write the names of the blacks who were denied their constitutional rights, as well as the names of the whites who were violating them. Norman later returned to the polling place in Ocoee with a shotgun. Whether the shotgun was taken from Norman is not entirely clear, but whites at the polls drove off Norman using his own shotgun. The white community began to form a mob and paraded up and down the streets, growing more disorderly and unmanageable. The rest of the blacks gave up on trying to vote and left the polling place. Later during the evening, Sam Salisbury, the former chief of police of Orlando, was called to lead a lynch mob to find and punish Mose Norman. He later proudly bragged about his part in the events. The white mob was on its way to Norman's home when someone informed him that their target had been seen at the home of July Perry. The mob, by then numbering about 100 men, arrived at Perry's home demanding that Perry and Norman surrender. When they received no answer, they attempted to break down the front door. Perry, who had been warned about the mob, fired gunshots from inside the home in self-defense. Exactly how many people were defending the house is uncertain. The whites estimated that there were several armed blacks. Zora Neale Hurston wrote that Perry had defended his home alone. Sam Salisbury knocked the back door open and was shot in the arm, becoming the first white casualty. Two other whites, veterans Elmer McDaniels and Leo Beauregard, were killed when they also tried to enter through the back door. Their bodies were found hours later in the backyard. The white mob withdrew and put out a call for reinforcements to whites in Orlando, Apopka, and Orange County, either calling them by phone or sending them by car. During the 2 to 3 hour lull, while the whites were recruiting other men, July Perry, injured in the conflict, attempted to flee with the help of his wife into a cane patch. He was found by the white mob at dawn and arrested. After Perry was treated at a hospital for his wounds, he was taken by a white mob from a vehicle while being transferred to jail. They lynched him and left his body hanging from a telephone post beside the highway. Norman was never found. Much of the trouble was attributed to outsiders from Winter Garden in Orlando. With reinforcements, the white mob took the conflict to the rest of the black community in northern Ocoee. The white paramilitary forces surrounded the northern Ocoee black community and laid siege to it. They set fire to rows of black houses. Those inside were forced to flee, and many were shot by whites. At least 20 buildings were burned in total, including every black church, schoolhouse, and lodge room in the vicinity. Black residents fought back in an evening-long gunfight lasting until as late as 4:45 a.m. Their firearms later found in the ruins after the massacre ended. Eventually, black residents were driven into the nearby orange groves and swamps, forced to retreat until they were driven out of town. The fleeing sought refuge in the surrounding woods or in the neighboring towns of Winter Garden and Apopka, which had substantial populations of black people. The siege of Ocoee claimed numerous black victims. Lang Maid, a black carpenter, was beaten and castrated. Maggie Ginlack and her pregnant daughter died while hiding in her home. Their bodies were found partially burned underneath it. Roosevelt Barton, a black hiding in July Perry's barn, was shot after the mob set fire to the barn and forced him to flee. Hattie Smith was visiting her pregnant sister-in-law in Ocoee when her sister-in-law's home was set on fire. Smith fled, but her sister-in-law's family was killed while they hid and waited for help that never came.
It's American history.
The black residents of southern Ocoee, while not direct victims of the massacre, were later threatened into leaving. Annie Hemmeter, a black woman residing in southern Ocoee, sometimes referred to as Mrs. J.H. Hemmeter, suspected that the massacre was planned so that whites could seize the property of prosperous blacks for nothing. According to Hamilton, people in southern Ocoee were coerced by the threat of being shot and burned out if they did not sell out and leave. About 500 black people in total were rapidly driven out of Ocoee, resulting in its population being nearly all white. That fall, white residents had to work to harvest the citrus crop because black laborers had fled the region. No black residents had settled there again until 61 years later in 1981. July Perry's body was found riddled with bullets and swinging on a telephone pole post by the highway, according to the Chicago Defender. His body was left near a sign reading, "This is what we do to niggers that vote." Another source has said he was hanged near the home of a judge who supported the black voter franchise. A local photographer was selling photos of Perry's body for 25 cents each. Several stores placed the photo on exhibition by their windows. No one was prosecuted for his murder. Perry's wife, Estelle Perry, and their daughter were wounded during the shooting at their home, but survived. The authorities sent them to Tampa for treatment in order to avoid further disturbance. Walter White of the NAACP arrived in Orange County a few days after the riot to investigate events. He was traveling undercover as a white northerner interested in buying Orange Grove property in the county. He found that the whites that there were still giddy with victory. A local real estate agent and a taxicab driver told him that about 56 blacks were killed in the massacre, while White's NAACP report recorded around 30 dead. A Methodist pastor, Reverend J.A. Long, and a Baptist minister, Reverend H.K. Hill, both from Orlando, reported that they had heard of 35 black deaths in Ocoee as a result of the fires and shooting. Charles Coe in 1970 described 12 dead. A University of Florida student who interviewed local residents for a history term paper claimed in 1949 that about 30 to 35 murdered is the most common estimate of the old-timers. The exact number could never be determined. White also learned that many black residents thought the massacre was due to the white community's jealousy of prosperous blacks such as Norman and Perry. No one was ever held responsible for any of the deadly violence. Agents of the Bureau of Investigation, later known as the FBI, showed up a few weeks later, but they made it clear they weren't investigating murder, arson, or assault. They were only interested in election fraud. The leader of the mob became mayor of Ocoee. Supporters urged the House Action Committee of Congress to investigate the riot and voter suppression in Florida with a view to suing under the 14th Amendment, but it failed to act. This concludes this week's episode of the Black Massacre.
Trained and ready to defend themselves and their community. As they approached the rally site, they could see the Klan members gathering, their hoods and robes making them look like a menacing army. The deacons stood their ground, watching as the Klan members started to march towards them, chanting hateful slogans and waving Confederate flags. The tension was palpable, and everyone knew that a clash was inevitable. The two groups met in the middle of the street, and the air was filled with the sounds of shouts and screams. Suddenly, shots rang out and chaos erupted. The deacons had opened fire on the Klan members, and the Klan members were firing back. In the midst of the gunfire and chaos, one of the deacons saw a group of Klan members approaching a nearby church, where a group of black children were attending a Sunday school class. Without hesitation, he ran towards the church, determined to protect the children. He burst through the doors, his gun at the ready, and found himself face to face with several Klan members. Without a second thought, he fired, taking them down one by one. The other deacons, seeing what was happening, ran to the church to help. The scene was a bloody mess, with bodies littering the street and the air thick with smoke. But in the end, the deacons emerged victorious. They had shown the Klan that they were not to be trifled with, and that they would stop at nothing to defend their community. As they left the scene, one of the deacons couldn't help but think about how far they had come. They had started out as a small group of men, determined to fight back against the Klan, and now they were a force to be reckoned with. The Deacons had proven that even in the face of violence and hatred, they would stand tall and fight for what was right. One of the most intense clashes between the Deacons and the KKK occurred in Bogalusa, Louisiana in 1965. The Klan had been terrorizing the black community for years, and the Deacons had had enough. On a hot summer day, a group of about 25 Deacons led by Charles Sims, a former paratrooper, approached a Klan rally armed with shotguns, rifles, and pistols. The Klan was caught off guard and quickly scattered, but not before firing a few shots at the Deacons. A fierce gun battle ensued, with both sides firing at each other from behind trees and bushes. The Deacons managed to hold their ground, and after several hours of fighting, the Klan retreated. The Deacons were able to drive the Klan out of Bogalusa for good, and their victory inspired other black communities to form their own self-defense groups. The incident also caught the attention of the federal government, which began to crack down on the KKK's activities in the area. The clash at the Bogalusa rally was a turning point for the Deacons, who became known as one of the most effective black self-defense groups in the country. They continued to protect their communities from white supremacist violence, and their legacy lives on today as a symbol of black resistance and resilience. Episode of Trap History, where we dive deep into the forgotten stories of Black American history. Today, we're discussing the Deacons for Defense and Justice, a group of African American men who stood up to the Ku Klux Klan in Louisiana during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. It's the early 1960s in Louisiana, and segregation is the law of the land. The Ku Klux Klan is active and violent, regularly terrorizing black communities with intimidation, violence, and even murder. In response, a group of African American men in the town of Jonesboro, Louisiana, decided to take matters into their own hands. They formed an armed self-defense group known as the Deacons for Defense and Justice, with the goal of protecting their families and communities from Klan violence. Not a formal organization, but a loose network of men who shared a common goal. They patrolled the streets, guarded meetings and protests, and provided security for civil rights activists who came to Louisiana to help in the struggle. The Deacons' weapons were legally owned, and they only used them in self-defense, but their very existence was a powerful statement. For the first time, African Americans were taking a stand against the Klan and other white supremacist groups, and they were doing it with force. The Deacons' tactics were controversial, even among some in the civil rights movement who believed in nonviolence. But the Deacons argued that they had no choice. They were fighting for their lives and the lives of their families, and their tactics worked. Klan violence in Louisiana decreased significantly after the Deacons came onto the scene. In fact, the Klan even called for a truce with the Deacons, acknowledging that they were not going to be able to continue their reign of terror against the black community. Deacons for Defense and Justice may not be a well-known part of civil rights history, but their legacy lives on. They showed that African Americans could and would stand up for their rights, even in the face of violent opposition. They paved the way for other self-defense groups, like the Black Panther Party, and helped shift the balance of power in the fight for civil rights. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Trap History. We hope you learned something new today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more forgotten.
So, what you guys think about that? See, in the midst of it, black people still had with all that going with itself, that's what they fear. See, it's good that they use fear tactic the whole time to control, but when somebody feel like the deacons had the mindset, we gonna go down, we taking you down too, and that's the mindset, and that that if they rise something, if a group rise up, it's like, hey, and that's, I think any group need to rise up. When you have some terrorist group trying to terrorize you and bully you, that's what you need to do. You need to take them down, whether it's here or like they do over in another part of the world. Like, you need to take them. That's the only thing they need to do. You got to send them to the grave, and that's basically what it is. And it's self-defense. They need to go down and see the devil. Basically, is that because they choose to do this, and it's like they see with so right said that don't solve it, but you got to defend yourself because you're dealing with somebody who that the people are so evil and so wicked that they don't care. This is how deep that's the extreme part of racism. And so when I made the previous video, that's why a lot of people was shocked that that dude made that video mocking, putting on the Klan hood and calling them other men of color out their name. He don't, this was no joke. People died because they tried to get their rights and everything. And for someone to make mockery of that, it's just, it's just terrible. They were America's terrorist group. Just like, you look over and over there in the different parts of the world, where it's Al Qaeda, Al Shabaab, and they do it for their religious reason. Well, they turn around and do it for their so religious reason, because even burning the cross represents some form of Christianity. I know some people don't accept that, but that's how they was able to practice. Why they was able to march in different cities, because they come up under a religious group, and they sued some cities because even though the Jewish people can put the menorah up, they feel like they can put this symbol of white supremacy up. So what happened was, the cities had to eliminate any religious symbolism, because that alleviate thought, so you won't violate someone's special freedom of speech rights. Yeah, that's why you see the Klan to this day. They do this, and that's why they go in any city and set up. But you got some people that are extreme, and that they move on a level like the Nazis do, and that's a whole different level. So yeah, this is something that you should take note. And the Klan didn't go away. That spirit is still in the land. It transforms. People think, oh no, it transformed. It transformed in the suit and tie. It transformed in the court. It transformed into other avenues. See, people don't understand this. That it went away, but the spirit of it, racism is a spirit in America, that it's not going away, because it keeps rearing its head in different parts of the country. I don't like to make videos like to be negative, but the reason why you see it so much on social media, because it's a spirit. It's a spirit that's been going on for decades and centuries. Imagine seeing this decades and centuries since the country was founded. Part of the American dream is the American night. That's part of the American nightmare. And just people trying to get their right to be free, but you have another people trying to keep denying other people based on their culture, their color, their skin, and feel like they're just like property. They shouldn't be able. That's how deep it really is. Hatred is deep, and it goes to a different level. It turns into taking somebody out. Murder. Basically is what it is. So, and you have to be careful to this day, because there are people still will take black people out secretly. There's still corruption in the land. That spirit haven't gone away. And you go to different parts of the country, it's still like that. Being a black man, a black woman, you can literally, and God need to be with you and protect you, because that's how wicked the system is. But I'm gonna leave it at this video. But yeah, people think that, oh, that's just old news. No, because you see how in every decade, the racism rise up in different parts, and it's still rising. It's still in the political office, from the State House to the White House, and it's still being funded underground. They just call it something different, and it shows you that in some of these news clippings. So, yeah, like Charlotte and all that stuff, they all came together. Now they transformed to different organizations, but the spirit of racism is still in the land. So I hope one day it would decease, but the only way it's going to be deceased when the Almighty God come back this world and take this world out. That's it. Because it ain't going to be no peace. Now with the devil running earth and having groups like this, that's a fact. So that's my message for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. But this is what the Klan was really about. And there are some people who are descendants of these people still in the land. And it gets deep. Alright then, hope you enjoyed this video. Share with somebody, like it, subscribe. Till next time, see you on the next video. You take care and try to be nice. Like Biggs would say on that, try to be nice to somebody. Be nice. And hopefully one day this will all soon come to an end. Take care.